you are their supportive base, and every path does not have to look the same. Give yourself some grace as a parent that your child's path does not have to look like yours did or like everyone else on your block did. There's so many options that it's okay if your kid zigs a little and zags a little and then comes back to center.
You're listening to Parenting with Impact, the podcast for parents like you, raising complex kids to become capable, independent adults, even in this complicated world. Each episode brings expert insights and real-life strategies to help you parent with confidence, calm, and clarity. Here are your hosts, Elaine and Diane.
Welcome back, everybody, to another conversation in the Parenting with Impact podcast. I'm excited to have this conversation today. We're going to talk with Caitlin Garman and talk about how do we support these young adults at this interesting transition point in their life when there aren't that many resources out there, and yet there are some. So we're going to talk about that. So Caitlin is with an organization called BroadFutures.org, everybody. It's a nonprofit organization that does internships and mentorships for young adults, roughly 18 to 26. And so how did you get to be working with this organization? How'd you come to be doing this?
Yeah, well, first, thanks so much for having me on. I love having these kinds of conversations as well. So I've got a long history working with kids and families in schools and out in the community. Started my career as a teacher. I think there's value in everyone starting their career at some point, being in a classroom, being in front of kids. So started my career teaching third grade. Found out pretty quickly that I loved working with kids and families, did not love teaching multiplication. Turns out that part's a little bit trickier. So I went back and got my master's in social work and then moved into school social work and spent about 10 years here in DC as a school social worker and transition coordinator at a large DC public high school. And so just did a ton of work in that role, supporting kids in school. And high school is such a pivotal age, right? You're getting ready to transition into adulthood. It's really, you're coming into your own. And really supporting families and figuring out, where do I land with my kid here? It's such an interesting age. A lot of parents tend to want to pull back. You need to. Your kid needs some independence, but also for, our kids who are neurodiverse or who have other challenges, they often still need you there as that base level of support. So I did a lot of work with families, kind of figuring out, what's my role here as my child is getting more independent, and how do I help them figure out where they want to go, who they want to be. And through that work, I ended up over at BroadFutures. And thank you for that intro. Like you said, we run an internship program for neurodivergent young people. We place them in paid internships in Washington, D.C. We provide mentoring, career training, really just try to equip them with the skills that they're going to need to be able to move into that more professional world after they leave high school.
Right. Well, there's a lot of directions we could go with this conversation. I want to start with before they get to you, right?
Yeah.
Before they get to whatever the resource is after high school, whether it's college and then an internship or mentorship before college or no college or whatever.
Yeah.
There are those late teen years that parents, as you so well put, need help navigating. We do a lot of work with parents of teens and parents of young adults in our community. What do you feel like parents of early young adults, before they get to this phase, really need to understand better that they may not understand?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I see that's so helpful is for parents to understand, especially when we're talking about, I think as you all put it, more complex kiddos, right? Kids who might have anxiety, ADHD, might be autistic, might be neurodivergent of some other kind. It's just that there are so many different paths available to kids when they are transitioning into adulthood, and that all of them are viable options. And I think, as a parent myself, I understand parenting is so, so hard. There are so many times when you second guess yourself or you feel like you've failed your kid. And I think it's really hard, when your kid gets to that age where they're in high school, you're thinking about what their next step is going to be, not to get kind of lured into that. Okay, well, after they finish high school, they're going to go to a 4-year college, they're going to do some internships, and they're going to live independently, go start their own family. That's sort of the traditional path. And it's really hard to see that there are many, many other options, but there are. We serve all kinds of different students, but we've got folks who are taking a traditional gap year right after high school, where they're, spending a year, domestically or internationally doing some different kinds of work before they head to college. We've got folks who try college and find this really isn't the right place for me. I need some kind of reset. We get folks who aren't going to try college, and that's fine, because just sitting in a classroom and learning is never going to be for them, but they still are super bright, super motivated, and can have a wonderful career and a wonderful life. So I think one thing it's really important to think about, if you're a parent, as your child is getting to that sort of transition age, is like, let's explore all the different options, even if they are not, what you had in mind for your child or the path that you took or the path that, your best friend's kid is taking. It's okay. There's so many different options. And as long as you are there exposing your kid to all of these different options, helping them figure out kind of who they want to be, what they want to do in life, it's okay. They can take a different path. It doesn't have to be that sort of very traditional path.
So here's what comes up for me as I hear you say that. Even before you get to a point of introducing an alt approach,
Yeah.
next step, there are some conscious conversations that parents might want to you might want to have with parents, or we might, or parents need to be
Yeah.
having, because you're starting with the assumption that the relationship is there enough for parents to introduce their kids to many options, which may not
Very true.
be the case. So I really want to go back to, before you talk about what happens out there, what's the conversations that you'd like to see that you think parents would do well to be aware of that need to happen before you get to these conversations? Like, what's the conversation before the planning conversation or the option?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good point, right? That part of it is that balance between letting go and still being a support, and really just, I think a lot of that is really just building that supportive relationship with your child and saying, okay, I'm just going to listen. We're going to have time where you just tell me what's going on with your day. What are you enjoying about school? What are you thinking? Like, we don't have to make a plan. I'm not going to tell you what I think you should do, but just really listening to your kid, sitting, being that open vessel to see, okay, what am I hearing that my kid is really enjoying? Maybe they're really enjoying, throughout high school when we have dinner, we have these open-ended conversations. Maybe they're really enjoying their math and science classes. So in the back of my mind as a parent, I might be thinking, STEM might be a direction for them. We might be looking at some college classes, but not to jump in and have that conversation about a plan right away. Oh, have we thought about this or that? But just saying, okay, I'm just going to catalog some of this information, but really just being that supportive presence for your child so that you can catalog some of that information. You're gathering some information about what the different options are, so that when you do sit down to have a planning conversation with your child, you're not starting from scratch. You're starting with, hey, I've heard you over the past few years talk about how you love writing so much. So I'm wondering if we should think about what are some careers that pull in writing, and is that something you think you'd like to do in the future?
I really appreciate what I hear you saying, and there are kind of two different directions. One is, you talked about sort of letting go and transferring ownership, and so that's one. I want to pin that for a minute.
Yeah.
The other thing I heard you saying is to really spend some time being curious, listening, understanding what's going on, what your kids' interests are, listening for the interest underneath. In our community, we see a lot of parents who demonize the technology and all they do is play video games and
Yep.
right. And so maybe taking some opportunity to get curious about what is it that they like about what they're doing on the screens, what's fascinating to them. But really, I hear you talk about active listening. And what I would probably add to that is get really curious about what's going on for them and what they care about and what they're interested in. And the other thing I heard you saying was really helping them to identify their strengths.
Yeah,
Because
for sure.
they may not know, because they may very often our kids will take for granted the things that they do well and only pay attention to what they don't do well. Right?
Yes.
Talk a little bit about identifying strengths.
That's such a good point. We do so much work on that in our program, talking about both strengths and accommodations, right? So that a kid really, really, or a young program understands both of those. And your point about strengths is so true. We always ask that in our interview, and sometimes it is like pulling teeth. And, we'll be in an interview with a young person, and we'll be looking at their resume and looking at their transcript and like, oh my gosh, there's things jumping off the page at me. And it's tough to get a kid to recognize, oh yeah, I am really good at drilling deep into something and getting detail oriented and finishing a project to its limit, or I am really good at following up and asking if I'm unclear about something and advocating when I don't know the answer. And so, one thing parents can do is really help reflect those back to their child as they're seeing those, to really help a kid internalize, oh yeah, I am really good at asking questions, or I am really good at working on a team. Look at these last few group projects, or I'm on a sports team, or I'm playing in a video game league and I have to coordinate with all these other people. Wow, I really am good at working with other people. And then on the flip side, really understanding, okay, if I have anxiety, ADHD, autism, whatever it is, what accommodations have been helpful to me? What are the things that also help me be more successful in high school that I could then take with me when I'm thinking about going to college, to the workplace, wherever? Is it having some extra time? Is it having, frequent check-ins with someone? Is it breaking things down so there are more concrete due dates along the way, right? Both of those things are really helpful when you're sitting down then to think about, okay, what's my next step after high school? Because things get a whole lot less prescribed when you leave high school.
Yeah, for sure. So going back to that strengths for a minute, before the accommodations, what I heard you say is reflecting back to them the strengths that you see,
Yeah.
which means you taking the time to identify and see what the strengths are that are underneath, because we're so good at seeing what's not being done, right?
Yep.
And so they need us to be able to say, wow, you were really kind to your friend just then. Or that was a really nice thing you said to your sibling. You've heard us saying since they were little, catch them being good.
Yep.
Well, now what we're talking about is kind of holding up the mirror and helping them see what their strengths are, what their gifts are,
Yeah.
what their natural talents are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it does remind me, I happen to be a parent of toddlers, and it is a lot of narrating some of that behavior. Oh, thanks. You did such a great job waiting, right? Some of those behaviors that we want to see. And it is similar, right? When you get to your big kiddos, right? Of narrating, wow, you did an awesome job, drafting that paper 5 different times. I know that was really laborious. I know that took you a lot of work, but that was awesome to see you really. That was so nice to see you dig in. Yeah.
So I love what you just said, because I often say that we tend to be really good with this transferring of ownership with toddlers, and then somehow they go to elementary school and we lose it.
Yeah.
We start directing again, teachers start directing again, they stop taking ownership. Like it's really funny how we're better at it when they're 3 and 4 than we are when they're like 13 and 14.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said for kind of recognizing what's available to them and beginning to encourage them, to trust them more, to take on more ownership, and so that we can get a sense of what they care about, right?
Yes. And it's okay as a parent to let your kid go out there and fail a little bit. And that is perhaps the scariest piece, right? Especially as they get into adolescence. There are so many ways that can go wrong. But, when we're thinking about sort of with an eye on, post-secondary transition, them figuring out what they want to do, who they want to be, it's okay if they get a job and they end up getting fired from that summer job because they weren't showing up on time, or they weren't following through with their tasks or whatever it was, because that's a really good learning experience for them. That's going to teach them about, maybe that's the kind of environment, that environment was way too fast paced for me. Or maybe, I need something that's a lot more structured. Or maybe that environment was so boring, I need to be in customer service and something that's fast paced. All those experiences can be learning experiences. And it's okay, as long as you're that sort of soft landing piece, it's okay for them to go out there and fail a little bit, because you can help them reframe that as, okay, that stunk. That was not a fun experience. Let's regroup. Let's think about what we can take from that experience. It was really hard for you to be working at the cash register at McDonald's because that was going super, super fast. So let's knock that kind of fast-paced work off the list right now, and let's experiment with something that's maybe more in an office or where you have time to work independently. Like, that's just giving us information about what you're good at, what you like to do, what kind of environment feels good to you. So framing some of those experiences, for shifting the independence back, framing some of those, what we might see as failures, as like, nope, we've just learned something about you. And that's okay. It's okay if you got fired, if you quote unquote failed. Now we're learning from it and we're going to move forward.
Yeah, in coaching, we call it failing forward, and I'll make sure to put in the show notes about it. So hang on one second. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Do you recognize current ADHD interventions fall short? At DIG Coaching, we have developed a new field of engineering and a new ADHD intervention called cognitive ergonomics from the inside out. To learn more, visit cognitive-ergonomics.com.
Welcome back, everybody. My guest is Caitlin Garman, and she's with BroadFutures.org, and we are talking about prepping young people for the next stages after high school, basically, or beyond high school, college. And so we've talked a lot about the role of the parent, the importance of getting curious, being a good listener, being present, letting your kids know that you're there for them, beginning to kind of let go and transfer ownership. So we've had a lot of conversations about the role of the parent, right? So let's assume that we've built some strong connections, we've built some good relationship. If you are not yet at a point where you feel like you're safe with your kid having these conversations, that's okay. The place to focus is to start by building the connection and building the relationship. And, we can help you with that. So once you feel like you've got that, now you want to talk about moving into the conversations to help your kids begin to see what's available, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned a lot of things. There are things that you do, things that other organizations do. Um, if we can pull back, not just from what BroadFutures does, but
Sure.
what are the options available for kids who may not be traditional kids, or
Yeah.
who the traditional path of straight from high school to college may not be a great fit? What do you see as their options?
Yeah. I think taking a gap year is a tremendous option. It's something that's really, we're an accredited gap year association. So I go to a lot of the gap year association meetings. I'm kind of moving around in that community a bit. It's really a wonderful opportunity for kids who need a break from school to take a pause, get some hands-on real world experience. They can develop independent living skills. They can work on that, socialization piece of like, okay, I'm going to be part of this group, be part of this team. They could come to an organization like ours and get some professional work experience, right? There's all different places you can go when taking a gap year, but it can be a really nice way where your child is still building the skills that they need to be a successful adult, all those executive functioning skills, the independent living skills, but they're not in a structured classroom, which might have been a really, really difficult space for them for the past, 12 plus years. So I think a gap year right out of high school is great. I also think there are options that we're seeing a lot more in the gap year community where folks are taking gap years all throughout their college experience, right? Some folks are going to take some classes in college for a semester, for a year, and then take a break and then come do some gap year programming and then go back, right? So this idea that you don't have to complete college in 4 years, but maybe it's, let me dip my toe in the water, take a few classes. Maybe I'm living at home and taking them at someplace local. Then I'm doing a gap year experience. And then by then I'm a little bit older. I've had a lot of experiences and I might have a clearer view of, oh, I'm really interested in government and policy. So I am going to go be a poli-sci major, but maybe I didn't know that when I was 17 years old. Or man, I've really done a lot of work out in the community and I would love to be, ultimately work with people in service of others. So I'm going to look into some of these human services fields and decide and figure out kind of what degrees ultimately I need to get to be able to go into that field, right? So with a little bit of experience and more time, you might have a better thought of what you want to do, which actually we find a lot of kids after they've taken their gap year are better at, they go back into school and they're like, okay, I know what I want to do now. This is serving a purpose for me. So they're sort of better able to get through the slog of what can sometimes be school.
So what you're speaking to specifically are structured gap experiences, right? You're talking about a tailored, structured, supported experience.
Yeah.
And I know some people are like, I'm not going to let my kid take a gap year if it's not an experience like that. Some people feel like an expense that they may not be able to afford.
Yeah.
What else is available?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think all of your points about structured gap years are certainly true. I think always good to look at all of the different school options, whether that's trade school, getting a certification, going to a local school and living at home to kind of balance some of those costs. I think we also see some folks who, take a gap year in a not structured way, right? Who maybe are living at home for a year, working at a job, and just kind of getting their feet as an independent adult, a pseudo-independent adult. And I think, parents sometimes really balk at that idea, like, oh, my kid should be on their own or they should be in college. But if that's where they need to be, if they need a break from school, but they're earning money, they're practicing some of those independent adult skills, that can sometimes be a good pause for them too. And then maybe you have an agreement, okay, in 6 months' time, let's come back to the table and let's talk about, all right, what's your next move? If this job is going well, is this a long-term thing? Should we think about what this looks like? Or is this, okay, I've learned some things, I've taken the break from school, and now I'm ready to go ahead and apply to school and sort of get back in it.
Well, there's so many steps in the process. As I'm listening to you talk, I'm remembering a semester one of my kids took off of school. It was in the middle of COVID, and a group of them went and lived in a city together. And my joke about his semester that semester was he learned how to get a job. He didn't do a particularly good job working any of the jobs, but he got a bunch of them.
Yeah.
That was a really essential life skill set that he acquired of how do you go through the process of positioning yourself and selling yourself and putting together resumes and applying. And just that for our kids can be a really powerful exercise. So
Absolutely.
really looking at the little pieces of the process that you're speaking to.
Absolutely. That like hands-on experience. Yeah.
Right. So there's unstructured gap year, there's structured gap year, before school, during school, sometimes after school. And one of my kids did it after college,
Yep.
applying to ongoing graduate education. There's an unstructured gap year. And what I'm hearing you saying with that is you really do want to make sure that you've got some clear expectations in advance of that there's some agreements.
Yeah.
Not just you're going to hang out and play video games all day, but we have some agreements going into it about what the expectations are, how you're going to be contributing to the family, whatever.
Yeah.
So now I know you also have some experience with mentorship and internship. So let's talk a little bit about those options. And are they for younger kids? Or are they more for kids in their 20s? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So we work with folks 18 to 26. So right in that kind of like post high school all the way through. We work with folks who are in college, not in college, all the way to graduated. That we find that internships are really a phenomenal way to practice some of these both executive functioning and kind of career readiness skills in a hands-on way, right? So you are in an internship experience, you are reporting to a boss, but you are practicing like, I have to get up early enough every day to be able to catch the bus to get to my job, right? I have to plan out my meals for that day. Okay, I'm going to be at work during lunchtime. Am I going to bring my lunch? Am I going to run out? Do I have time to run out? Like all of these little skills that it takes to be, a full functioning adult, you're getting to practice in an internship program. And you're also getting that career piece of like, okay, I'm going to do an internship in something and figure out if I actually like doing this job. Because some kids will think, right, like, oh, I really want to work in PR or advertising. I love social media. I want to go into that. And they find out like, oh man, it's a lot of typing. It's a lot of sitting at a computer and creating stuff. And like, no, I actually didn't like that. I actually like the part where I get to be in front of people. So maybe they've learned about themselves that they're a little bit more of a customer service person than a communications person, right? And it can teach them a little bit about where they want to go in a future career. And so I think the internship work experience in general is, preaching to the choir here, is massively important for young people, especially young people with disabilities. It's just a huge, huge bonus for them. And then the mentoring piece, we do mentoring in our program. Lots of other programs have mentoring as well. But really our mentoring is meant to just be like a sounding board for folks, right? You're at work and you're just like not sure how to solve a problem. Okay, talk it over with your mentor. Or you're feeling stuck, like, I don't know if I'm doing a good job at all. Okay, let's talk about how you can have a conversation with your manager to get some feedback. Or you feel like you need an accommodation that you're not getting. All right, let's role play. I'll pretend to be your manager. You ask for the accommodation. I'll give you feedback on how you're asking for that. So it can be a nice way to have someone who's not a parent, because to your point, right, sometimes those relationships are super fraught. You've been with your kid for a really long time. They might be sick of listening to you, and that's okay. But it's just another person to come in. We use a peer mentoring model where our mentors are a bit younger. And so it's nice. Our interns really can look up to these folks like, okay, you're not an ancient dinosaur like my mom, right? You're not 100 years old. And you've recently been through this kind of piece of life. So I kind of trust what you're saying here when you're telling me, oh no, you actually need to show up on time to work.
Super. Caitlin, this is so helpful. I guess, is there anything else that we haven't talked about that's another option for these kids?
I think this
for
was
some of them, I guess, going to work for a while.
Yeah, for sure.
It may be for some of our kids years later before they figure out they want a degree or certification or something.
Yes. And that's part of the reason we work with folks, all the way up to age 26, because sometimes we do have folks who are 23, 24, 25 who are like, okay, I've figured it out now. Okay, I think I have an idea of what I want to do. So I want this internship experience. And I think that kind of ties up our conversation perfectly. Parenting is really hard. It is okay if your kid takes this kind of zigzag path and takes a while to get there. Like you are their supportive base, and every path does not have to look the same. So, give yourself some grace as a parent that your child's path does not have to look like yours did or like everyone else on your block did. There's so many options that it's okay if your kid zigs a little and zags a little and then comes back to center. It's okay.
Absolutely. I love it. Love it. Okay, so here's how you can find out more about Caitlin and the work that happens at BroadFutures.org. You can reach Caitlin on her LinkedIn page. All of this is going to be in the show notes. Lots of great resources there. Really good organization. And a lot of other resources on their page as well. And then we'll put some other resources in the show notes as well for other organizations we we know who are serving this age population.
Yeah.
So Caitlin, is there something we haven't mentioned that you want to bring in, or is there something we have talked about that you want to highlight? Like, how do you want to wrap up your piece of this conversation?
I think, yeah, I think just that of what we said, your job as a parent is incredibly difficult. And a lot of times it is pulling yourself back and saying, I'm going to be curious. I'm going to listen. I'm going to focus on this relationship. And in my mind, I could be making a million different plans, but I'm going to be present with my kid and listen and help reflect back to them. Okay, what are my child's strengths? Like, what do I see for them in the future? And really give over some of that independence and allow your child to really take that information from you, fail a little bit, but you're just that supportive base for them to come back to.
Well, and as I'm hearing you say that, I'm thinking about the hundreds and hundreds of the parents are the ones who are desperate for a plan.
Yeah.
Right. Parents, there are a lot of parents who really want to plan. They want to see the path. They want to know what to expect. And we're living in a world where that's not always so clear and easy. And for our kids, it's not always so clear and easy. So any insights about what to say to parents who are looking for a structured path that may not be where their kid is yet?
I think give yourself as a parent some grace and say, okay, I think it's so important as a parent to have your own supportive community, to carve out time in your life, to find, what is your passion, your hobby outside of work, outside of your kids, to keep your, to quote every cliche here, to keep your cup filled a little bit. But it really is so important because I think sometimes as parents, it's so hard not to be so anxious about every single thing that's going on with our child and really seeing, I have toddlers and already I'm like, oof, where are they going to go to high school? Like, that's 12 years down the road. We're okay. We've got time to plan. So just, reminding yourself, having a mantra for yourself, it's okay if my kid doesn't have a plan right now. I will be okay. It will be okay. Not every kid needs to have a full-fledged plan till they're 26, written up in high school, and it'll be okay. And giving yourself some grace to say, I'm anxious about this, or like, I'm upset that this isn't going the way I want it to go, and it's going to be okay. And I can still be there for my kid.
Yeah, that's really, really powerful. And it's so important to connect and find community. That's what we found as we started working with parents of young adults, is how important it is for them to connect with each other in our groups, our programs. And I really appreciate what you're saying, is it's okay not to have a plan right now. And if we can believe that, your kids can believe that.
Absolutely.
You're trying to push our need for it on them. The person that really has to get out of the way there is us.
Yep.
Right. And so sometimes we have to do our own work and manage our own anxiety so that we can be present to our kids with what's important for them. So
absolutely.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anything else? Do you have a favorite quote or motto that you want to share with our community?
I do. I always go back to that, and it's overused all the time, but that Frederick Douglass quote, if there's no struggle, there's no progress. I used to have that in my classroom when I was a teacher, and I think it's so pertinent for kids, for young adults, for parents, right? If there's struggle and it's difficult, it doesn't mean you failed. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It just means that you're not quite there yet, and that progress, that end goal often takes some friction and some difficulty, but that you'll get there. And the struggle doesn't mean failure.
Beautiful. I like that. If there's no struggle, there's no progress.
Thank you.
Thank you. Caitlin, thank you for being here, for sharing your enthusiasm. So, because clearly you love supporting this population. See it. Thanks for what you're doing, for the work of you and your organization, and for sharing with our community. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's truly a pleasure. To those of you listening, my friends, what are you taking away from this conversation? What's your insight or your awareness? We've talked about a lot of things, talked about the kids, talked about us, talked about the steps that are possible. What's your insight from this conversation? Not the information, but the insight. And as always, is there some action you want to take based on that awareness? Is there maybe a conversation you want to have with a partner or with your kid? Is there something you want to explore? What's the next step for you based on that insight? And as always, my friends, thank you for what you're doing for yourself and for your kids. At the end of the day, you make this huge difference. So thanks for tuning in. Next conversation is going to be with Melanie Savasensky. So Keep listening, tune in, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.